The morning Adeline Osei-Boateng walked into the Hargrove and Pine law firm. She was wearing her church coat. Not because it was Sunday. Because it was the only coat she owned that didn't have a fraying cuff. She had taken the 7:14 bus from Scarborough. 42 minutes, 2 transfers, standing the whole way because the seats were full. And she wasn't the kind of woman who asked someone to move. She carried a folder under her arm. The kind you buy at Dollarama, the thin cardboard kind that bends if you hold it wrong. Inside it were documents she had spent 3 evenings organizing at her kitchen table, under the yellow overhead light. She was there for a consultation about a property dispute. A piece of land her late father had owned outside Barrie. Nothing glamorous. A fence line disagreement with a neighboring development company that had been dragging on for 2 years. The receptionist looked up when Adeline walked in, then looked back down. Adeline stood at the front desk for a moment, then another. She set her folder on the counter, gently, not aggressively, the way she'd learned to do things in spaces that made her feel like she was already apologizing for being there. "I have a 10 o'clock, she said. "My name is Adeline Osei-Boateng." The receptionist typed something, slowly. "With which associate?" "Mr. Whitfield." More typing. "He's running behind. You can take a seat." She took a seat near the window. The waiting area had leather chairs and a glass coffee table with a spread of magazines. Maclean's, Report on Business, Canadian Lawyer. A water feature in the corner made a sound like a creak. The carpet was the color of old money. 3 other people were waiting. 2 men in suits who were called in within 15 minutes of each other. A woman in a blazer who was brought back almost immediately. At 10:45, a young associate came out. Late 20s, very pressed shirt, the kind of confident that comes from never having had to wait very long for anything. His name tag read, B. Whitfield. Not the senior Mr. Whitfield she had spoken to on the phone. His son, apparently. Or nephew. She would find out later. He looked at the waiting area, looked at Adeline, then looked at the receptionist with the faintest flicker of something. Confusion, maybe. Mild recalibration. "Miss Osei-Boateng?" She stood. "That's me." He shook her hand, briefly, and led her down a hallway lined with framed photos of the firm's founding partners. They passed a boardroom with a long oak table. They went into a small office at the end, the kind reserved for junior staff and walk-in consultations. "So," he said, sitting down and opening a notepad. He hadn't offered her coffee. He hadn't asked if she'd had trouble finding parking. "You're here about a land dispute?" "That's right." She opened her folder. "My father, Kwaku Osei-Boateng, purchased 42 acres outside Barrie in 1991. He passed in 2019. The property transferred to me through his estate. In the spring of 2022, a development company called Meridian Reach began construction on the adjacent parcel. They're building a subdivision. During initial grading, they moved survey markers and extended their perimeter approximately 6 meters into my land." She placed the documents on his desk. "Survey records, the original deed, aerial photographs with the encroachment marked in red." He glanced at the papers without touching them. "And you've been living on this property?" "No, I've been renting it to a farming family for the past 4 years, the McPhersons. They've been there since my father was alive, so it's agricultural land." "It's land," she said. "It's my land." He picked up the top page finally, held it by the corner, like he was handling something he wasn't entirely sure about. "What's the estimated value of the parcel?" "The full 42 acres, as of last year's assessment, is valued at approximately $1.4 million. The disputed strip, the 6 meters, sits along the road frontage. That's the most commercially valuable section." He set the paper down, wrote something on his notepad. "Mrs. Osei-Boateng, I want to be straightforward with you. Meridian Reach is a significant client of this firm." She looked at him. "I'm not saying we can't help you. I'm saying there may be a conflict of interest that requires." "Mr. Whitfield." Her voice was calm, absolutely calm. "I was told when I booked this appointment that your firm specializes in property and estate law. I was not told that Meridian Reach was a client here. I've had this appointment for 3 weeks. I understand that. Do you?" She folded her hands on the desk. "Because I'm looking at a situation where I was kept waiting for 45 minutes past my appointment time. Brought into the smallest office in the building, and now being told, very politely, that the firm representing the company that is trespassing on my property might not be able to represent me. He opened his mouth. She wasn't finished. I want to be clear, I'm not here because I need someone to hold my hand through this. I've already had the survey independently verified by a licensed Ontario land surveyor. I have a real estate lawyer in Barrie who has reviewed the deed transfer. I came here because this firm has a litigation department that I was told handles exactly this kind of encroachment case. She paused. If there is a conflict, I expect to be told that in writing today, so I can take that documentation to the Law Society of Ontario. The office got very quiet. B. Whitfield looked at his notepad, then at her, then at his notepad again. I'll need to speak with the senior partners, he said. Before I can, please do, she said. She closed her folder, placed it back under her arm, stood up. My contact information is in the intake form I filled out. I'll expect a call by end of business Thursday. If I don't hear from you, I'll assume the conflict of interest is confirmed and act accordingly. She walked out of that office, down the hallway, past the founding partners in their frames, through the waiting area with its leather chairs and its running water, and out through the glass front door into the February cold. On the bus home, she sat down this time. A young man had offered her his seat without her asking. She thought about her father. Kwaku Osei-Boateng had come to Canada from Ghana in 1979. He had worked 23 years in a paper mill outside Barrie. He had saved carefully, not extravagantly, not with any grand plan, just steadily, the way he did everything. He had bought that land because he believed in owning something. Dirt and deed, he used to say. Everything else is just renting from someone. He had never told anyone in town what he paid for it. He had never told anyone what it was worth. He drove the same truck for 12 years and wore the same 5 jackets in rotation and brought his lunch to work every single day in a blue thermos and a container his wife packed the night before. People in Barrie knew him as the quiet Ghanaian man who owned some farmland out on the county road. They were cordial. They were not curious. He would have laughed, Adeline thought, at the idea of someone underestimating him. Not bitterly. Just laughed. The way you laugh at something that keeps happening, and you've simply stopped being surprised by. The call came Wednesday. Not Thursday. Not from B. Whitfield. From a woman named Helena Pruitt, senior partner. 28 years with the firm, the kind of voice that had argued cases before the Ontario Court of Appeal. Mrs. Osei-Boateng, I've reviewed the file from your consultation on Monday. I owe you an apology. Adeline was at her desk. She worked from home. Financial analysis for a mid-sized investment firm, had done so since before it was fashionable. She was in the middle of a spreadsheet, but she set it aside. Go ahead, she said. You should not have been assigned to a junior associate for a matter of this complexity and value. That was an administrative failure, and it was compounded by the conflict disclosure being handled poorly. You were right that it should have been identified before your appointment, and you were right that you deserved it in writing. I'd like to remedy that, and I'd like to discuss whether you'd be open to the firm representing you in this matter. You said Meridian Reach is a client. Was, Helena Pruitt said. We completed a transaction for them in 2021. There is no current retainer. When my associate said significant client, he was speaking loosely and inaccurately. I've had a conversation with him about that. Adeline let a beat pass. What's your read on the case? Honestly, your documentation is strong. The survey evidence is clean. Meridian Reach has been aggressive in this development. This isn't the first boundary dispute to come out of that project. If you want to pursue this, I think you have a very good chance of not just recovering the land, but recovering costs. And if I want to pursue damages, a small pause on the other end. Reevaluation. You've done your homework. I've been working on this for 2 years, Miss Pruitt. Yes, I can see that. Another pause. If the encroachment was willful, and given the timeline and the survey marker displacement, I believe we can argue it was, then yes, damages are on the table. Potentially significant ones. Adeline looked out her window. February in Scarborough. Gray sky, a birch tree in the backyard that had survived every winter she'd lived here. She'd bought this house in 2009. Paid it off in 2021. She owned it the way her father had owned his land. Quietly, completely, without asking anyone's permission. "I'll come in," she said, "but I want to meet with you directly. Not a junior associate." "Of course," Helena Pruitt said. "My calendar is open Friday morning. If you've been following along, and thank you, genuinely, for being here. But the way it went matters. Stick with this story." The Friday meeting was different. Same firm, same glass front doors, same leather chairs in the waiting area. But Adeline was taken to the boardroom this time, the one with the long oak table she'd seen through the window on Monday. There was coffee. There was a colleague of Helena Pruitt's from the litigation side, a man named Clarence Osei. No relation, though he'd smiled at the name, and a paralegal who took detailed notes. They spent 2 hours going through the documentation. Clarence Osei pulled up the aerial photos on a large monitor. He zoomed in on the property boundary. He walked through exactly how the survey markers had been moved. Not just pushed, but removed and repositioned, which suggested planning, not accident. He showed Adeline satellite images from 2 different dates, one from April 2021, one from August 2022. The difference was visible and damning. "This is the kind of thing," Clarence said, leaning back in his chair, "where the other side is hoping you don't have resources to fight it. They move the line 6 meters, they build, they sell units. By the time anyone pushes back, there are 50 families living in the disputed zone, and the political pressure to resolve it quietly becomes enormous." "I'm not interested in quiet," Adeline said. "Good," Helena Pruitt said. They filed the statement of claim in March. Meridian Reach responded with their usual posture. Deny, delay, offer a fraction, hope the other side runs out of money or patience. They countered Adeline's claim with an argument that the survey markers had been displaced by frost heave, a natural settling of the ground. They brought in their own surveyor, who produced a report. Adeline's team brought in 2. The discovery process took 4 months. During that time, Adeline drove up to Barrie on 3 separate occasions to walk the land with the McPhersons. The farming family, Lorna and Jerry McPherson, in their 60s, who had been working that soil for 15 years, were shaken by the whole thing. They'd watched the construction equipment creep closer and closer to their fence line. Jerry had gone out once to ask questions and been told, by a site foreman, that the boundary had been officially resurveyed and he should direct his concerns to the property owner. The property owner, of course, was Adeline. Nobody had called her. She stood at the edge of her father's land on a warm July evening, looking at the half-built subdivision rising on the other side of the fence. Wood frames and insulation wrap and orange mesh fencing. The smell of sawdust and turned earth. "Your dad would have been so calm about this," Lorna McPherson said, standing beside her. "I know," Adeline said. "Drove me crazy sometimes. My Jerry gets wound up about everything. Your father would just..." She made a level gesture with her hand, like a horizon line. "He was stubborn, though," Adeline said. "He was just quiet about it." Lorna laughed. "That's exactly right. Never raised his voice once. But he didn't move either. Not for anything." Adeline looked at the fence line. At the place where 6 meters of her land had been quietly swallowed, she wasn't moving either. The deposition of Meridian Reach's director of site operations, a man named Stuart Greer, took place in October. Clarence Osei led the questioning. Stuart Greer was 47, former military background, now VP of Field Operations for a company that built subdivisions across central Ontario. He was used to being the most authoritative person in a room. He came in with 2 lawyers from Meridian's legal team, and a kind of baseline certainty that this would be resolved quickly. He was shown the satellite images. He was shown the original survey from 1991, the independent resurvey from 2023, and the differential mapping that showed exactly how far the site boundary had shifted. He maintained the frost heave explanation. Then Clarence pulled out a memo, internal, dated September 2021, 7 months before construction began on the disputed section. It had come out in discovery. The memo was from Stuart Greer to Meridian Reach's land acquisitions manager. It referenced the county road frontage of the parcel adjacent to their site. It noted that the frontage had commercial upsell value for the end units of the subdivision. It recommended that the site boundary be confirmed in the company's favor before final grading. 2 months later, the survey markers moved. The room was very quiet while Stuart Greer read the memo a second time. One of his lawyers asked for a recess. The settlement offer came 6 days later. It was not a fraction. It was substantially more than what Adeline had originally sought. She read it at her kitchen table, under the same yellow overhead light where she had organized her documents the year before. She read it twice. Then she called Helena Pruitt. "I want the land formally documented," she said. "I want the encroachment acknowledged in writing, the survey markers restored to original positions, and any construction on the disputed strip halted." "They've agreed to all of that," Helena said. "The financial component is also. I know what it is." Adeline looked at the number on the page. "I want it put toward a scholarship." A pause. "I'm sorry? The financial settlement. I want it directed into a scholarship fund. My father was a paper mill worker who saved 20 years to buy 42 acres in Barrie. He never went to university. He wanted his kids to. 2 of his grandchildren are in high school right now." She smoothed the edge of the paper with her thumb. "I want something in his name. For students from his community. That's what I want to do with it." Helena Pruitt was quiet for a moment. Not a professional pause, a real one. "That's an extraordinary thing to do," she said. "It's what he would have wanted," Adeline said. "He never made a fuss about money. He just wanted the land to mean something." The announcement was made in February, 1 year, almost exactly, from the day Adeline had walked into the Hargrove and Pine waiting room in her church coat. The Kwaku Osei-Boateng Scholarship Fund was established at Lakehead University's Aurelia campus, close enough to that county road outside Barrie to feel intentional. The first cohort of recipients would be announced in the spring. Priority was given to first-generation students of African descent pursuing law, land use planning, or environmental studies. A local Barrie paper ran a short piece on it. Nothing major. A brief in the community section, 3 paragraphs. But the piece mentioned the land dispute. And it mentioned Meridian Reach. And it mentioned the memo. By the end of that week, 2 other property owners near the subdivision had contacted Helena Pruitt's office. B. Whitfield, the young associate from that first consultation, sent Adeline an email in March. She almost deleted it without opening it. She didn't. It was 3 sentences. "Miss Osei-Boateng, I've been following the outcome of your case. I handled your initial consultation poorly, and I've thought about it, more than you probably know. I hope the scholarship does everything you intend it to." She read it 3 times. Then she wrote back 2 words. "Thank you." Not because he deserved more, but because her father had taught her that you don't have to match someone's smallness. You just have to be clear about your own size. The McPhersons planted a tree at the edge of the restored boundary that spring. An oak. Lorna had picked it. She'd said it was the right kind of tree for someone who didn't make a fuss, but also didn't move. Adeline drove up in April to see it. It was small. A sapling, really, barely 4 feet tall, staked against the wind. But it was there, in the right place, on the right side of the line. Jerry McPherson stood next to it with his hands in his pockets. "Your father would have liked this," he said. Adeline crouched down and pressed her hand to the base of it, to the soil that her father had bought with 20 years of lunches packed in a blue thermos, on land that no one had expected him to fight for, in a country that had sometimes made him wait longer than it should have. "Yeah," she said. "He would have. Before you go, if this story meant something to you, consider subscribing to Birthright Tales. Every week, we bring you stories like this one. Real people, quiet strength, and the moments when the truth finally lands where it belongs. Hit the like button if you stayed until the end. Drop a comment and tell us, what would you have done in Adeline's position? Would you have walked out of that office? Would you have taken the settlement quietly? And share this one. Some stories deserve to travel further than the algorithm takes them.